Before we begin, a quick warning. Tennessee True Crime contains detailed descriptions and images of real-life violence. Some listeners and viewers may find the content deeply disturbing. This content is intended for mature audiences only. And remember, the goal of sharing these stories is not to sensationalize tragedy, but to honor the truth, give voice to those who can no longer speak for themselves, and honor the victims. Listener discretion is strongly advised. In the morning hours of November 1994, deep inside the Great Smoky Mountains, a vehicle was found where it should never have been. A Jeep at the bottom of an embankment. Inside was 35-year-old Kelly Livera. He wasn't in the driver's seat, and the injuries that killed him did not come from this supposed crash. Investigators would determine the car wreck came after the violence. What followed was not one clear answer, but a trail of evidence that led away from the mountain and back home into Sevier County. It was why the truth had to be hidden at the bottom of a mountain road. You see, some deaths look like accidents until they don't. This is the case of Kelly Livera. They say the South never forgets, and Tennessee, she remembers everything. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime, where the shadows of the volunteer state's past meet the stories that refuse to be forgotten. I'm your host, Tiffany Morgan. Each week, we dig into twisted tales of betrayal, violence, and mystery, the ones where whispers carry truth, and the answers are never as simple as they seem. Let's step into the dark and piece together the clues, because in Tennessee, some secrets still haunt the hills. This is Tennessee True Crime.
Down through the smoky hollers where the cold wind sighs, footsteps fall where the moonlight hides, whispers over rivers, a secret lost in time. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime.
On November 6, 1994, park rangers in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park were alerted to a vehicle that had gone down an embankment. It was on that bypass that most of us have stopped at to look down over the town of Gatlinburg and snap a couple pictures. Tourists were doing just that when they spotted the car. The vehicle was a Jeep Cherokee, and it had left the roadway and traveled down that steep slope. Inside the vehicle was the body of Kelly J. Livera, just 35 years old. Now, at first glance, the scene looked like a single vehicle accident, the kind that investigators see often in those mountainous areas. Sharp curves, narrow roads, limited lighting. But it didn't take long for investigators to notice something didn't quite fit. Kelly Livera was not in the driver's seat. He was found in the rear cargo area of the Jeep. That detail alone raised immediate concern. And while there are horrible crashes that sling people around their cars when they aren't wearing seatbelts, this was not one of those. And then they saw the injuries. These didn't look like injuries consistent with a vehicle crash. Not injuries caused by rolling down an embankment. The injuries, it looked like, occurred before the Jeep ever left the roadway. It looked like blunt force trauma to the head. And the blood from Kelly just wasn't making sense, because gravity does what gravity does, but the blood in the vehicle was running uphill and out the back hatch. These findings soon reclassified the case. This was no longer an accident investigation. This was a homicide. And now investigators had to answer the most basic question of all. Who killed Kelly Livera? Now, Kelly was described by friends and coworkers and witnesses as a very steady guy, very dependable, and super predictable in his routines. He worked as a professor at Pellissippi State College in Knoxville. And many of us know that's a job that requires structure and consistency and accountability, traits that those who knew Kelly would later say matched his personality very well. There was nothing in his background to suggest volatility or recklessness or a tendency toward risk taking. Kelly was also known for his love of the outdoors, particularly the Great Smoky Mountains. He spent his time hiking and driving mountain roads and visiting the park, activities that were very familiar to him and considered not unusual by those close to him. He dreamed of owning a cabin in the woods someday. Now, this familiarity initially made the scene where he was found seem very plausible as an accident, at least on the surface. Kelly was married to Alicia Shane Lavera, who went by Shane. The couple lived together in Sevier County, Tennessee. Shane was the only daughter of teenage parents who separated just a few years after she had been born. Her mother later remarried, this time to a local bank president, and Shane went from a struggling childhood to a life of relative prosperity. She was very socially active, going on dates, enjoying parties, but she was also involved academically and curricularly serving as editor of her yearbook and president of her ski club. Now, in May of 1984, Shane's stepfather died by suicide. This was following an investigation into unethical loan practices there at his bank in Gatlinburg. According to Shane's friend, Jamie Satterfield, who spoke to Oxygen's Snapped, the death of her stepfather was absolutely devastating. Not only had Shane lost another father figure, but the scandal surrounding the bank left her family under suspicion and also under financial strain. So Shane and her mother were left with debt, and Shane had to drop out of college due to financial constraints. Now, eventually, she enrolled into a small college in Missouri where she met Kelly Lavera, who was a 24-year-old student and marching band member. They were immediately drawn to each other. 1 month after their first date, they moved in together. Kelly gave Shane a sense of security that she had been lacking since her stepfather's death, while Kelly, whose own parents had recently divorced, really craved the stability that Shane seemed to provide. 6 months later, they were married. Now, over those next 5 years, they lived in Missouri. Kelly graduated and became a teacher, and Shane delayed her own career to raise their first child, who was born in 1987. They later had a second child and moved to Shane's hometown of Sevierville, Tennessee. Financial pressures, as they do, especially when you have children, began to mount. The couple accumulated significant debt, and Shane was largely responsible for managing it. Now, Kelly's stepmother later told Snapped that while Kelly was focused on modest living and nature, Shane seemed to have a different level of needs and desires. With Kelly's teaching salary and their debts, they could only afford a small apartment in Sevierville's Frog Alley. Now, this was a neighborhood known for its party lifestyle, filled with young singles and couples who enjoyed gambling and nightlife. By 1994, Kelly had begun to worry about the effect that the partying might have on his children. So he made the attempt to slow down. But Shane, she didn't. She continued to host the parties at the apartment, and she frequently socialized, including with a man named Brett Ray. So, Brett Ray had served in the Navy, but received a dishonorable discharge after an altercation with an officer. Though he had financial stability through family connections, he was very unambitious and spent his time driving around and really just causing mischief on the weekends. Friends observed that Shane and Brett were both very wild personalities, and she gave him attention that did not go unnoticed by people around her. On November 5th, 1994, Shane hosted yet another party at their apartment. Friends from around the area came by, and even motorcycle gangs were present. Now, Kelly reportedly drank pretty heavily and fell asleep on the couch around 1 a.m. The following morning, Shane began knocking on neighbors' doors looking for him. Kelly was missing. That was until around 9 a.m. when those two tourists spotted Kelly's Jeep. Now, police eventually arrived at the Lavera apartment around noon to notify Shane. She recounted the previous night. After Kelly had fallen asleep, she went out with Brett and returned around 3 or 4 a.m. Kelly woke up and, of course, became angry about her absence, and they got into an argument. Shane told investigators that Brett was just a friend, but Kelly allegedly did not believe her, and he left in his Jeep. Shane said she didn't follow him because their children were there asleep. So the investigation into this apparent staged crash seemed to be stalling until police got a lead. A tip came in from a friend of Brett Ray, who said that Brett had called him early that morning asking for a ride because he was stranded. When he went to pick him up, Brett was covered in dirt. Now, according to that friend, Brett got in his vehicle and immediately started bragging. I did it. I did it. I got rid of Kelly. But he didn't stop talking there. He also confessed to the location where he said he had thrown out his bloody clothes and other evidence, and bragged that his seductress, Shane, offered him lots of money and some really good lovin'. Now, what he didn't count on was a small tree, barely keeping that Jeep from going all the way down the embankment, which likely would have left Kelly undiscovered for years. When police went to that site given by the friend, they found the items of clothing as well as a blanket from the Lavera home, all with Kelly Lavera's blood splattered on it. The investigation was starting to shed light, and the pieces were starting to click together. The time came to lay Kelly to rest. And at Kelly Lavera's funeral, something felt off, to say the least. You know, funerals are usually quiet places. They feel heavy. People move slowly, voices stay low, and grief hangs in the air like a fog. But for those people that were there that day, Shane Lavera didn't seem to be weighted down by any of it. Multiple family members later said that she appeared to be just emotionally detached. They didn't see her cry. She didn't linger at the casket. She didn't seek out Kelly's family or offer comfort. Instead, witnesses said she was talking, laughing, socializing, behavior that one family member would later say felt more like a gathering than a goodbye. Now, Kelly's stepmother would go on to say something about Shane's demeanor really unsettled her. Not because there's a right way to grieve, but because Shane's behavior didn't resemble grief at all. It felt distant and disconnected, almost impatient. Let's get on with it. At the time, nobody said anything out loud. They didn't have proof. It was just that quiet, nagging instinct that people talk about later, the one that doesn't really make sense until it does. Looking back now, that funeral becomes one of the first moments that investigators and family members point to and ask the same question. If this was an accident, why didn't she act like a grieving widow? Sometimes the truth doesn't just show up in evidence right away. Sometimes it shows up in silence where tears should have been. Aren't those actions that one would expect from a spouse at a funeral? Wouldn't you be grieving, crying, sad? Not Shane. That absence of visible grief and the way that Shane kept her distance from the rest of the Levera family left Barbara with an inner feeling that Shane was involved in what had happened to her stepson. Now, for them, it was not just the physical evidence or the testimony that suggested foul play. It was the way that someone closest to Kelly carried herself in the wake of his death. As evidence and witness statements piled up, police arrested Brett on murder charges, and Shane was subsequently brought in for questioning. Things were not looking so good for the pair. Now, Shane quickly obtained legal representation, which, of course, ended the interrogation. But there were plenty other people to speak to. And when police spoke to those witnesses, it didn't seem that Brett only had feelings for Shane. It seemed that they had established quite the torrid affair. According to reports, Shane would sneak out of her and Kelly's bedroom window, slip behind the apartments, and crawl into Brett Ray's window in that same complex. Now, meanwhile, another neighbor at the Levera apartment complex came forward, claiming to also have had an affair with Shane. That neighbor told police that Shane had asked him, more or less, to help her kill her husband. Shane had reportedly said that she wanted custody of the children and did not want to divorce Kelly. According to the neighbor, she was researching books on witchcraft, looking for a poison that could not be detected during an autopsy. It was a dark web of relationships and obsession and planning, all of which would become central to the murder investigation. So, investigators conducted forensic testing inside the Levera residence. This finding aligned with the medical examiner's conclusion that Kelly Levera suffered fatal injuries before being transported in that Jeep. Using luminol, they detected blood evidence that pointed to a very violent assault. The patterns were not consistent with a minor injury. They were consistent with a serious, targeted attack. Evidence suggested a chilling sequence. Kelly had been attacked inside his own home, and he was then placed into his Jeep. The vehicle was driven onto the bypass, where it was pushed or driven down that steep embankment and staged to look like an accident. Now, adding to the horror, it's rumored that they got him out of the house by dragging his body out of a bedroom window, his children's bedroom window, which raises questions. Did his children hear the commotion and see what was going on? Did they see their mama helping a man lift their daddy's body out of their window, and they just had to lay there and pretend to be asleep? So while there was evidence mounting up in regards to Brett, Shane was not yet in the clear. A friend of Kelly's, named Alberta Boring, said that Shane called her the morning after the murder. The first thing she asked, how much life insurance does Kelly have? Because that's exactly what you should be worried about immediately after your husband dies, right? What detectives found out was that Kelly's life insurance money doubled if he lost his life in an accident. So, that's exactly what they tried to make it look like. With evidence piling up against them, both Shane Levera and Brett Ray were charged with first-degree murder in connection with Kelly's death. The case was heard in Sevier County, Tennessee, and quickly became a central focus for prosecutors, given the shocking details and the evidence gathered from the apartment in the mountains. The courtroom became a battleground, not just over what had happened to Kelly Lavera, but why.
Resume that because I got to cut out some silence anyway because that's how I go and edit these.
Prosecutors told the jury that this was not a spontaneous act, but it was a conspiracy. They argued that Shane and Brett had worked together to kill Kelly because Shane wanted out of her marriage, and prosecutors said they stood to benefit financially. Remember that life insurance policy? Investigators and prosecutors pointed that out as a possible motive for staging the crash. But Shane's defense told a very different story, of course. They did not deny that Kelly was murdered. They acknowledged the death itself, but they pointed the finger squarely at Brett Ray. They argued that Brett had been driven by his obsession with Shane and had killed Kelly completely on his own. Shane claimed that she had gone to sleep that night, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Now, her defense said that Brett came over and murdered Kelly with a baseball bat while she was asleep, leaving her ignorant of the actual assault. And for some reason, Brett was still enamored with Shane. Brett's own legal strategy was very unusual, to say the least. According to court reporting and witness accounts, Brett told his attorneys, "Do not make an opening statement and do not deny anything" during his defense. Crazy. He remained silent in the courtroom, a choice which his lawyers honored, but I'm sure they were going crazy. And it was widely reported that he still professed his love for Shane, expressing his own willingness to take the fall for everything to keep her out of trouble. Now, Shane acted like she didn't know why Brett was like this. She had denied their affair and any evidence of it. And she explained it away by saying she had to go on with him because she was in fear for her life. But after they were arrested and got out on bond, private investigators captured video of Shane and Brett meeting up in the woods for a sexual encounter, which prosecutors pointed to as evidence that the relationship between them continued consensually while the case was pending. Can't really explain that away. The prosecution brought in those witnesses who testified about conversations that Brett had with friends, in which he admitted to killing Kelly, and about what Shane had said in the past about wanting out of the marriage, and in one account, asking about those undetectable poisons. Defense counsel also brought up that other man Shane had been involved with, named Wade Hill, calling him as a witness to argue that her relationship with Brett, and not a conspiracy to kill Kelly, completely explained her behavior. Now, after a short deliberation, the jury found both Shane Lavera and Brett Ray guilty of first-degree murder. Before formal sentencing, though, both entered guilty pleas to first-degree murder in exchange for a deal that spared them a sentence of life without parole, allowing them instead to be eligible for parole after 25 years, as Tennessee law permits. After Shane Rivera was convicted and sentenced to life with the possibility of parole, she did not stop fighting the legal system. In March 1999, she filed a post-conviction petition, raising a number of challenges related to her trial and her plea. Now, her argument included claims of ineffective assistance of counsel, that her attorney had failed to provide adequate representation, and that her guilty plea had been involuntary or coerced. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I'm feeling like her attorney did a pretty good job seeing as how she was convicted of first-degree murder and still had the chance of parole after 25 years. That is absolutely maddening to me. She also contended that entering that guilty plea after a jury verdict violated protections against double jeopardy. The trial court denied her petition, so she appealed. The case, of course, reached the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals, which carefully reviewed the record and concluded that none of her claims had merit. The appeals court reaffirmed that her plea had been entered knowingly and voluntarily with an understanding of its consequences, including the waiver of certain rights tied to post-conviction relief. They also held that there was no legal prohibition against entering a guilty plea after a jury verdict had already been returned. For those reasons, her conviction and her sentence were upheld. Years later, in December 2013, Shane filed a habeas corpus petition, arguing that her conviction was void on its face because a plea was accepted after a jury verdict, which again, they had already said, it's fine. The habeas corpus court dismissed that petition without a hearing, finding it failed to state a valid claim. It, too, was appealed, and once again, the Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the denial. In other words, the court found that Shane's guilty plea, even though it came after the jury conviction, was legally sound, she knew exactly what she was doing, and that her challenges were not enough to overturn her conviction. That legal fight ended without altering the outcome. But the story did not end there. Decades after her conviction, Shane became eligible for parole under Tennessee law, which allows those serving life with parole eligibility to be considered after a set number of years. In January 2022, she was granted parole and released. A development that was widely reported and I'm sure angered a whole lot of people. Her release was obviously met with strong reactions by the family. Kelly Lavera's stepmother, Barbara, said in interviews that although Shane was out walking around free and clear, Kelly remained dead and noted that they won't ever have him walking around again. Let this sink in. She planned and participated in the murder of her husband, watched as his head was beaten in with a bat, then allowed his body to be dragged through a window where her children were sleeping, and called him in as a missing person, knowing full well where he was and what happened to him. And she's just out there wandering around among us. Meanwhile, Brett Ray, Shane's co-defendant, remains incarcerated. His own appeals and post-conviction efforts were also denied, and as of the most recently reported parole hearings, his request for release has been rejected. And one fact in this case is immutable. Kelly Lavera does not come back. That is the only outcome here that cannot be altered. One part of this story exists almost entirely out of public view, and that's where it really belongs. Kelly and Shane Lavera had 2 children. They were young when their father was killed, and in the aftermath of the arrest, custody was awarded to Kelly's mother. From that point forward, their lives moved largely away from courtrooms and headlines and cameras. What is documented is limited but meaningful. Their daughter, Casey Lavera, has spoken publicly about her relationship with her mother during Shane's incarceration. So, Casey Lavera, the daughter of Kelly and Shane, has said that Shane has a boyfriend and a life. People have asked her if what she feels her mom got what she deserved with her sentence. And Casey says that what her mom deserves in her life is not for her to decide. She believes in God and that what you put out into the world is what you get back. She also said that while she doesn't get a say as to what her mother deserves, she does get a say as to what she herself deserves. She intends to set boundaries in her life to reflect that and honor the family and friends that she feels do deserve to share things in her life. Her communication with Shane is very, very limited. She said that she has never asked her mother about her father because she has no interest in hearing what she has to say about him. She doesn't want to hear good memories about her father from her. Those can come from someone else. And that's valid. Why would she? So she can manipulate the circumstances. So she can make it seem like she loved him. So she can control the narrative. Because that's what you get to do when you silence the only other party that can speak out, right? Play victim to your own decisions, right? Tell your own version of events and try to convince people why things went down the way that they did or what kind of vulnerable state you were in, right? Frankly, though, it's disgusting. She's disgusting. Taking the life of her children's father when all she had to do was walk away, ruining so many people's lives. Because in the end, she chose to murder their father. And now she's out roaming free, living life. And she's not the only pathetic woman to get a slap on the wrist and carry on about her sorry, miserable life after murdering a great man. It happens too often, really. Right? Beyond that, the record on their relationship with Shane really goes quiet. And that silence is important because whatever relationship exists or does not belongs to them. They didn't choose the marriage. They didn't choose the affair. They didn't choose the violence. And they certainly didn't choose to grow up with their father gone. So when we talk about outcomes in this case, it's worth remembering that the deepest consequences weren't handed down by a judge or written into a sentence. They unfolded quietly over years in the lives of children who had to grow up around a truth that they never asked for. Some stories end in verdicts. Others keep going, unseen, unrecorded, and unresolved. And this is one of those stories. Here's the question that lingers long after the case file is closed. When a crime is planned, staged, and concealed, is justice measured by years served or by the life that never gets to resume? Long after the sirens stopped, long after the courtroom emptied, long after the verdicts were read and the appeals were denied, there is still one truth that yet again never changes. Kelly Lavera is gone. The mountains where his Jeep was found still stand, unmoved by the passage of time. Trees grow and trails shift. Tourists pass through, stopping to admire the beauty below, without knowing what happened there. without knowing that a man's life ended not in an accident, but violence carefully disguised as one. The law did what the law could do. Files were closed, sentences were imposed, parole hearings were held. One conspirator walked free decades later. One remains behind bars. But Kelly remains exactly where he has always been since that November morning. Absent from birthdays, empty at holidays, frozen in time at the age he was when his life was taken. And the question that lingers isn't just who did what, because the courtroom answered that. It's why. Was it jealousy? Was it desperation? Was it money? Was it a tangled, messed up combination? Or was it something quieter, something harder to name? The slow erosion of a marriage that ended not with a signature on paper, but with blood on a floor and a body in the back of a Jeep. Those answers live in fragments, in testimony, in whispers, in memories that changed with time. And maybe they live in places that we'll never reach. What we do know is this: justice is a process. So when the lights go out and the episode ends, remember Kelly Lavera. Not as a case, not as evidence, not as a verdict, but as a person whose story ended too soon, in a place that still feels his absence. Because the mountains may be silent, but silence does not mean they forget, and neither should we. This episode, The Backseat Lie, was written and hosted by me, Tiffany Morgan, and produced by Main Street Media. This episode is sponsored by the amazing folks at Jones & Co. Real Estate. Y'all go home with us. Background music and theme song by John T. Productions. Research support from Court Archives. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, we would love to partner with you. Our sponsors keep our shows funded and running. To support Tennessee True Crime, follow us on Facebook at Tennessee True Crime and Instagram at TN True Crime. You can find case and evidence photos on those socials. We are also now on Spotify, Audible, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, CastBox, iHeartRadio, Overcast, and Pocket Cast. Give me a follow on your favorite streaming platform and share it with your friends who need a good show to listen to. If you have a case that you're interested in me covering, please feel free to email me at tntruecrime@mainstreetmedia.llc or shoot me a message on any one of those social media platforms. Join me next week as we uncover another Tennessee case that left a lasting mark. Because here in Tennessee, we never stop telling the stories that matter, and some secrets we refuse to let stay buried. Tune in next time on Tennessee True Crime.
Down through the smoky hollers where the cold wind sighs, footsteps fall where the moonlight hides, whispers over rivers, a secret lost in time. Welcome to Tennessee. True crime. Dark tales in the mountains where the mist won't lie. Echoes of the fallen under starless skies. Hear the hush of memory, the voice of the unsaid. This is Tennessee True Crime, where the shadows trail.